My mom told me to stay away from the new kid in class, and not listening to her was the best decision I ever made. Brian seemed like a normal kid to everyone. He was average to the untrained eye, tall, attractive, and played sports. But for some reason, there was something petrifying about him. When he walked into class for the first time, our teacher went ghost white. I didn't know what was going on, so I made the effort to talk to him since no one else would. I asked if he wanted to be friends, and he said, "Are you sure?" I don't know why people avoided him, because we spent the whole day having some of the most fun I've ever had in my life. I didn't have any friends at the time, so I went home excited to tell my mom about the new one I had made. But when I told her his name, her face went white. "Stay away from that kid. Him and his dad are monsters. They hit and hospitalized their mom." I was shocked. The next morning, Mom drove me to school instead of letting me walk. She marched right up to my teacher and whispered something that made Mrs. Squelch nod grimly. When I tried to sit near Brian in class, Mrs. Squelch moved my seat. I took one look at Brian from across the classroom, and I saw him nearly tearing up. During recess, he stood alone by the fence while everyone else played. And after school, I saw why. Brian's dad pulled up and the entire pickup area cleared out. Parents grabbed their kids and speed walked to their cars. One mom actually said, "Don't look at him, sweetie," to her daughter. Brian's dad just sat there with his head down while Brian climbed in. Everyone treated him like they were awful, but it didn't add up. Brian's dad would pack Brian extra granola bars for kids who forgot lunch money, and Brian voluntarily stayed after school to help with tutoring special needs kids. There was just no way this was the family who hit their own mother. Then came the day I realized who Brian and his father really were. I was walking home counting the $50 my grandma gave me for my birthday when 3 8th graders surrounded me. "Look at the rich boy," the biggest one said, and shoved me to the ground. They grabbed my money and one of them kicked me in the ribs. I curled up waiting for more when suddenly they all scrambled away. Brian's dad stood there, not touching anyone, just standing. "You okay, kid?" he asked before helping me up. He walked me home without saying much else. When I told Mom what happened, she completely lost it. "He approached you? What if he'd taken you somewhere?" She called the school immediately. "A known abuser confronted my son," she kept saying. By the next day, the whole school knew. The principal sent out an email banning Brian's dad from school property. Parents shared it on Facebook, calling him a predator who lurked around children. At school, Brian looked destroyed. He sat with his head on his desk most of the day. When I tried to slip him a note saying thanks for his dad helping me, he pushed it back. "Please don't," he whispered. "You're making things worse for him." 2 weeks later, I saw Brian crying in the library. He was trying to hide it, but his shoulders were shaking. I sat down anyway. "They spray-painted Predator on his car," Brian said. "He lost his job because of it. We might lose our apartment." He wiped his eyes hard. "Everyone hates him, but they don't know anything." "What do you mean?" I asked. Brian looked around to make sure we were alone. He then dropped the bomb. Turns out, him and his dad never hit their mom. In fact, it was the other way around. Their mom hit them. She'd throw bottles, smash pans, plates, use lighters. Brian still has a burn mark on his back from that. "Then why was your dad blamed?" I asked him. That's when he just broke down crying. He revealed that this mom, on top of hitting them, always threatened his dad, saying if he ever left and took Brian, then she'd tell everyone dad was the abuser. My face went pale. "And that's what she did," Brian said, crying. "When dad took me and we finally left, she took him to court and lied about everything." "Then why does everyone say you are guilty?" "Because you're all fing idiots who can't do a Google search." He then pulled out his phone and showed me something that changed everything I ever believed about them. The court documents showed everything. Photos of Brian's injuries, medical records, police reports where neighbors called about his mom screaming and throwing things, even a recording Brian's dad made on his phone where she admitted hitting them and threatened to lie if he ever left. My hands shook as I scrolled through page after page of evidence that nobody in our town had bothered to look up. Brian watched my face carefully. I could see years of pain in his eyes, waiting for me to reject him like everyone else had. Instead, I handed back his phone and made a decision that would change everything. I started spending more time with Brian after that. Mom noticed immediately and confronted me in the kitchen while I made a sandwich. She blocked my path to the stairs, arms crossed. I explained what I'd learned about the court case. Her face went through several expressions before settling on disbelief. She called Brian's dad a manipulator who'd fooled the courts. When I mentioned the evidence, she waved it off as fabricated. The conversation ended with her forbidding me from seeing Brian again. The next morning, she drove me to school early and marched into the principal's office. Through the glass door, I watched her gesturing wildly while Principal Morrison nodded along. When she came out, she looked satisfied. Mrs. Squelch pulled me aside later and informed me I'd been assigned a new lab partner in science class. Brian would be working alone from now on. At lunch, I found Brian sitting by himself in the far corner of the cafeteria. When I approached with my tray, he shook his head. The lunch monitor appeared immediately, steering me toward another table. Brian mouthed, "Sorry," as I was led away. After school, I waited by the bike racks until most kids had left. Brian emerged from the building alone, shoulders hunched. We walked together for a few blocks before he spoke. His dad had received another eviction notice. The landlord cited safety concerns after parents complained about having an abuser in the building. They had 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. I asked if there was anything I could do. Brian shrugged hopelessly. Nobody would rent to them. His dad couldn't find work. The grocery store had asked them not to come back after customers complained. Even the food bank volunteers whispered when they showed up for supplies. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I lied to Mom about going to the library and instead went to Brian's apartment. The building was run down but clean. Brian's dad answered the door, surprised to see me. Up close, I noticed how tired he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, clothes hanging loose on his frame. The apartment was nearly empty. Boxes lined the walls. Brian emerged from his room and froze when he saw me. His dad offered me water in a plastic cup, apologizing for not having proper glasses. We sat on folding chairs while Brian showed me more evidence on his laptop. Security footage from their old house, text messages from his mom threatening to hurt herself and blame them, photos of bruises on Brian's arms and back. Brian's dad spoke quietly about the night they finally left. His wife had thrown a glass bottle that shattered against the wall inches from Brian's head. That was the breaking point. He packed their things while she was passed out and drove through the night to our town, hoping for a fresh start. Instead, she filed charges the next day, claiming they'd attacked her and kidnapped Brian. The custody battle was swift. She showed up to court with self-inflicted documented bruises and a convincing story. Despite the evidence Brian's dad presented, the judge was swayed by her tears. She got supervised visitation rights while Brian's dad got primary custody and a reputation as an abuser that followed them everywhere. I asked why she did it. Brian's dad rubbed his face wearily. Control, he said. She couldn't stand losing them, so she made sure nobody else would want them either. The smear campaign started immediately. Social media posts, calls to his employer, whispers at school events. By the time the full court documents were public, showing her as the actual abuser, the damage was done. People had made up their minds. Brian pulled up his mom's Facebook page on the laptop. Her latest post showed her with a black eye, claiming Brian's dad had violated the restraining order. The comments were full of sympathy and outrage. Someone had shared it to the town community page where parents were organizing a protest outside the courthouse for his next hearing. I studied the photo carefully. Something seemed off about the bruising pattern. Brian noticed my expression and pulled up an older photo from 2 years ago. The black eye was identical, down to the yellowish edges. She was recycling old injury photos to keep the narrative alive. We spent the afternoon documenting everything. I helped Brian organize the evidence into folders while his dad made calls to legal aid lawyers. Most wouldn't take the case. The few who would wanted retainers he couldn't afford. One lawyer told him bluntly that public opinion cases were nearly impossible to win, especially when children were involved. People always believed the mother. As I prepared to leave, Brian's dad thanked me for believing them. He said I was the first person in months who'd actually listened. Brian walked me to the door, quiet. In the hallway, he grabbed my arm gently. He warned me that his mom would target me next if she found out I was helping them. She monitored everything, had people watching and reporting back to her. I told him I wasn't scared, but the look in his eyes said I should be. Walking home, I noticed a car following me slowly. It turned when I turned, stopped when I stopped. My heart raced as I ducked into a convenience store. Through the window, I watched the car idle outside. After 10 minutes, it finally drove away. I took a different route home, checking over my shoulder constantly. Mom was waiting in the living room when I arrived. She knew where I'd been. Someone had seen me entering Brian's building and called her immediately. The lecture lasted an hour. She threatened to homeschool me, to move us to another town, to get a restraining order against Brian's family. I sat silently, thinking about the evidence I'd seen, the fear in Brian's eyes, the injustice of it all. That night, I lay awake planning. Brian and his dad needed help, and the adults in our town had failed them completely. If nobody would look at the evidence, I'd have to find another way to make them see the truth. But first, I needed to understand exactly what we were up against. I started researching Brian's mom online. Her social media presence was extensive and carefully curated. Photos of her volunteering at women's shelters, posts about surviving domestic violence, inspirational quotes about healing and strength. She'd built an entire identity around being a victim. The comments were always supportive, full of people sharing their own stories and condemning Brian's dad. Digging deeper, I found inconsistencies. Posts where she claimed to be at therapy appointments that conflicted with court records, showing she'd skipped mandated sessions. Photos from expensive restaurants during times she claimed to be too traumatized to work. A GoFundMe page that had raised thousands for her recovery, while Brian and his dad struggled to buy groceries. School became a minefield. Teachers watched me constantly, making sure I didn't interact with Brian. Other kids whispered when I passed, repeating stories they'd heard from their parents. Someone left a note in my locker calling me an abuser sympathizer. During PE, I was accidentally hit with a basketball hard enough to leave a bruise. Brian had it worse. His locker was vandalized with permanent marker. Someone poured spoiled milk in his backpack. During chemistry class, his lab partner refused to work with him, loudly announcing she didn't feel safe. The teacher did nothing, just assigned Brian to work alone at the back of the room. After a week of this, I made a decision. If the adults wouldn't help, maybe other kids would. I started small, talking to classmates who seemed less invested in the drama. I showed them the court documents on my phone during lunch, pointed out the inconsistencies in the story everyone believed. Most brushed me off, but a few listened. Alex from my math class admitted his older brother had gone to school with Brian's mom and remembered her being crazy violent even back then. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Nishi, whose mom worked at the women's shelter, overheard her mother talking about Brian's mom. Apparently, she'd been asked to leave the shelter volunteer program after several incidents where she'd encouraged women to make false accusations against their partners to gain advantage in custody battles. The shelter director had been concerned about liability, but hadn't reported it officially. I convinced Nishi to tell me more. We met at the park after school, away from prying eyes. She was nervous, kept checking around us as she spoke. Her mom had kept notes about the incidents, worried about potential lawsuits. Brian's mom had coached at least 3 women on how to fake injuries and manipulate photos. She'd even offered to testify as a character witness for women she'd barely met, as long as their stories painted the fathers as abusers. This was huge, but I needed more. Nishi refused to let me see the notes or talk to her mom directly. She was already risking a lot by telling me. I understood, but felt frustrated. We had pieces of truth scattered everywhere, but no way to put them together in a way that would matter. Meanwhile, Brian's situation worsened. They'd found a new apartment in a rough part of town, the only place that would rent to them. His dad's car had been vandalized again, this time with the windows smashed. Someone had called Child Protective Services with an anonymous tip about neglect. The investigation found nothing, but it added another layer to their nightmare. I started documenting everything myself. Every incident at school, every piece of gossip, every small act of cruelty. I took screenshots of social media posts and saved them in a hidden folder. If Brian's mom was building a false narrative, I'd build a true one to counter it. The next twist came during a school assembly about bullying. As the principal droned on about kindness and inclusion, I noticed Brian wasn't there. Later, I learned he'd been called to the office during the assembly. His mom had shown up at school, despite the restraining order, claiming she needed to see her son for a medical emergency. The office staff, sympathetic to the abused mother, had almost let her in before someone remembered to check the court orders. Brian was shaken when I saw him after school. His mom had made a scene when denied access, crying about her baby boy being kept from her. Several parents witnessed it and naturally sided with her. One father had confronted Brian's dad in the parking lot, calling him a monster for keeping a mother from her child. Security had to intervene. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stop intervening interfering or you'll regret it." My blood ran cold. I showed Mom, hoping she'd finally see the danger Brian's family faced. Instead, she took my phone and said this proved she was right about them being trouble. She changed our phone number the next day and installed a tracking app to monitor my location. But I couldn't stop. Brian needed someone in his corner, and his dad was drowning trying to protect them both while fighting a battle the whole town had already decided he'd lost. I had to be smarter, more careful. If Brian's mom was watching, I'd have to find ways to help that she wouldn't see coming. The evidence was all there, scattered in court documents, social media posts, and whispered conversations. Someone just needed to piece it together in a way that couldn't be ignored. I thought about the recording Brian had played for me, his mom's voice admitting to the abuse, threatening to lie. If one recording existed, maybe there were more. I had work to do, and I knew it would only get harder from here. Brian's mom had built her web of lies carefully over months. It would take more than good intentions to untangle it. But seeing Brian's grateful smile when I slipped him a note of encouragement, watching his dad's shoulders straighten just a little when I waved at him in the parking lot, I knew I couldn't give up. The truth was out there, buried under layers of manipulation and small-town gossip. I just had to find a way to drag it into the light where everyone could see it. The real battle was just beginning. The evidence folder on my computer grew thicker each day. I organized screenshots, timestamps, and contradictions into categories while Mom worked late shifts at the hospital. Brian's mom had posted about attending a support group meeting the same evening court records showed she'd been arrested for public intoxication. Another post claimed she couldn't afford groceries, yet her Instagram showed her at an expensive spa retreat that same week. School became increasingly hostile. Someone scratched predator lover into my desk during lunch. The janitor painted over it, but the indentations remained visible. Teachers who once smiled at me now watched with suspicion. Mrs. Squelch moved my seat 3 more times, each position further from Brian. I started leaving notes in Brian's locker using the old ventilation slats. Simple messages of support, updates on what I'd found. He never responded directly, but I'd catch him reading them between classes, shoulders slightly less hunched afterward. The turning point came unexpectedly. While researching at the public library, I overheard 2 women discussing Brian's mom at the next table. One worked at the bank where she'd recently tried to open an account using Brian's social security number. The attempt failed when they discovered she'd already maxed out credit cards in his name. The bank employee seemed troubled but unsure what to do with the information. I pretended to browse nearby shelves while listening. The women mentioned other incidents. Brian's mom showing up at local businesses claiming Brian's dad owed her money, demanding they garnish wages he didn't even earn there. Several store owners had started comparing notes, realizing the pattern of harassment. That evening, I created a simple spreadsheet documenting every contradiction I'd found. Dates, times, locations, screenshots. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic deception, but I needed someone with authority to look at it. Someone who couldn't be dismissed as a kid with a conspiracy theory. Brian's situation deteriorated further. During gym class, someone accidentally threw a baseball that hit him in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping, while the teacher barely glanced over. At lunch, kids would knock his tray while passing, spilling food he couldn't afford to replace. He started eating outside, alone by the dumpsters. I tried sitting with him once, but the principal appeared within minutes. New school policy, apparently. Students with safety concerns couldn't interact during school hours. The hypocrisy burned. Brian was somehow both dangerous and in need of protection, depending on what suited the narrative. Mom installed cameras at our house after the mysterious text. She checked my backpack daily, monitored my computer usage, drove me everywhere. I learned to work around her surveillance, using the school library computers during study hall, hiding printed evidence in my textbook covers. The breakthrough came through Nicholas, whose dad worked at the courthouse. He'd overheard his father discussing Brian's mom with colleagues. Apparently, she'd filed multiple false police reports over the years, not just against Brian's dad, previous boyfriends, employers who'd fired her, even a neighbor who'd complained about noise. The pattern was always the same. Dramatic accusations, social media campaigns, demands for money. Nicholas agreed to help after I showed him my evidence folder. His older sister had been falsely accused of shoplifting by Brian's mom years ago when she'd worked at a clothing store. The accusation was proven false by security footage, but his sister still lost her job due to the controversy. We started meeting at the library after school, comparing notes. Nicholas brought copies of public records his dad had mentioned, restraining orders Brian's mom had filed against various people, all eventually dismissed. Court transcripts where judges noted her concerning pattern of allegations. Police reports where officers documented inconsistencies in her stories. Meanwhile, Brian's dad lost another job. Someone had called his new employer claiming he was a registered offender. It wasn't true, but the employer didn't want the controversy. I watched Brian count change for lunch the next day, coming up short for even the cheapest meal. I slipped money into his backpack when no one was looking. The situation exploded during parent-teacher conferences. Brian's mom showed up despite the restraining order, claiming she had a right to discuss her son's education. She wore sunglasses and a scarf, limping dramatically. Parents in the hallway gasped and whispered, immediately believing her implicit narrative of recent abuse. Security tried to escort her out, but she collapsed in the hallway, wailing about being kept from her baby. Someone filmed it, and the video spread through parent Facebook groups within hours. The comments were vicious, calling for Brian's dad to be arrested, demanding the school protect this poor mother. I recognized the manipulation instantly. The limp switched legs halfway through her performance. The sunglasses slipped, revealing no bruising, but pointing this out would only make me seem heartless. Brian's mom had mastered the art of weaponizing sympathy. Brian didn't come to school for 3 days after that. When he returned, he looked hollow. His dad had been questioned by police again. Neighbors had started a petition to force them out of the building, and someone had thrown a brick through their apartment window. I couldn't stand by anymore. Using a computer at the library, I created an anonymous blog called The Truth About Brian's Family. I uploaded every piece of evidence I'd collected: court documents, screenshots of contradictory social media posts, police reports showing Brian's mom as the aggressor. I included the recording Brian had shown me, where his mom admitted to the abuse and threatened to lie. The blog gained traction slowly. A few parents started questioning the narrative. Someone shared it in a local Facebook group, sparking heated debate. But Brian's mom responded swiftly, claiming the blog was harassment, that the document documents were forged, that this was another attempt by her abuser to silence her. She filed a police report about the blog, demanding an investigation into cyberbullying. The school sent home letters warning about online harassment. Mom confronted me that night, having seen the blog shared by another parent. I denied creating it, but she didn't believe me. She took my laptop, changed the Wi-Fi password, and announced I'd be homeschooled starting Monday. The thought of abandoning Brian made me physically sick. That night, I snuck out using the tree outside my window. I ran to Brian's apartment, finding him and his dad packing what little remained. They were leaving town, giving up. Brian's dad had found a job 3 states away, somewhere his reputation might not follow. I begged them to stay, promised things would get better. Brian's dad looked defeated. He showed me new photos on his phone, their car tires slashed, child abuser spray painted on their apartment door. Brian's school records mysteriously leaked online with their new address circled. Brian pulled me aside while his dad loaded boxes. He thanked me for trying, but said it was too dangerous now. His mom had started suggesting I was being groomed by his dad, that my defense of them was proof of manipulation. It was only a matter of time before those accusations stuck. I helped them pack in silence, my mind racing. There had to be something more I could do. As I lifted a box, a folder fell out. Inside were more recordings, dozens of them. Brian's dad had documented years of abuse, threats, manipulation, audio files of Brian's mom admitting to lies, threatening to hurt herself and blame them, coaching Brian on what to tell teachers. Brian's dad noticed me looking. He explained he'd kept everything, hoping someday someone would listen, but lawyers said recordings made without consent weren't admissible. Police said it was a civil matter. Child services believed the mother's tears over documented evidence. An idea formed. The recordings might not work in court, but the court of public opinion had different rules. I asked to borrow the folder, promising to return it. Brian's dad hesitated, then nodded. He had nothing left to lose. I spent the weekend transcribing every recording, creating a timeline of abuse that spanned years. The pattern was undeniable. Escalating violence, detailed threats, admission after admission of false allegations. I uploaded everything to the blog, including audio files where legally permissible. The response was immediate. Brian's mom threatened legal action, claimed the recordings were deepfakes, accused me directly of harassment despite the blog's anonymity. But something had shifted. People started coming forward with their own stories about her. Former co-workers, ex-boyfriends, parents who'd noticed inconsistencies but stayed quiet. Nicholas's dad quietly pointed concerned parents toward public court records. Nietzsche's mom shared her concerns about Brian's mom's behavior at the shelter with other volunteers. Alex's brother posted on social media about remembering Brian's mom's violence in high school. The narrative was cracking, but not fast enough. Brian and his dad still planned to leave at the end of the week. Mom had enrolled me in an online school, cutting off my access to help. Brian's mom had filed for emergency full custody, claiming his dad was planning to kidnap him. I made one last desperate move. Using Nicholas's help, I printed hundreds of flyers with QR codes linking to the blog. We distributed them at grocery stores, coffee shops, anywhere parents gathered. The flyer simply said, "The truth about Brian's family, you deserve to know." Brian's mom responded by showing up at my house, pounding on the door, screaming about lawsuits and harassment. Mom called the police while I watched from my window. Brian's mom performed for the officers, crying about being victimized again, but they'd seen her name in too many reports. They escorted her away with warnings about trespassing. That night, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Squelch called our house. She'd read the blog, reviewed the evidence, remembered inconsistencies she'd dismissed. She apologized for not protecting Brian, for letting bias cloud her judgment. She wasn't the only one. Other teachers, parents, and community members started reaching out, expressing regret and asking how to help, but it might have been too late. Brian's dad had already paid the deposit on an apartment 3 states away. Brian had withdrawn from school. Their few possessions were packed. The damage to their reputation, their finances, their spirits seemed irreversible. I sat in my room, grounded indefinitely, watching through social media as the community slowly awakened to the truth. Comments shifted from sympathy for Brian's mom to outrage at being deceived. Parents demanded the school review its policies. Some even started a fund to help Brian's dad with moving expenses, though he was too proud to accept. The blog visitor count climbed into the thousands. Local news reporters started sniffing around the story. Brian's mom's carefully crafted victim narrative was crumbling, but at what cost? The family she'd terrorized was still leaving, still broken, still bearing the scars of her lies. 3 days before they planned to leave, I got a message through Nicholas. Brian wanted to meet one last time. Mom was at work, so I slipped out through the garage. We met at the park where everything had started to unravel, where I'd first learned about his mom's pattern of false accusations. Brian looked older somehow, worn down by months of persecution. He thanked me for everything, said no one had ever fought for him like that. I told him it wasn't enough, that I'd failed. He shook his head. For the first time in years, people were seeing the truth. His dad could leave with some dignity restored. Maybe in their new town, they could truly start fresh. We sat on the swings, not talking much. I gave him a flash drive with all the evidence I'd collected, in case he ever needed it. He gave me a letter to read after they left. We both knew this was goodbye, that his mom's threats made it too dangerous to stay in contact. As I walked home, I noticed something different. Parents at the playground weren't pulling their children away when they mentioned Brian's name. A woman who'd been particularly vocal about banning Brian's dad from school property was reading the blog on her phone, shaking her head in dismay. The truth was spreading, slow but steady. Brian's mom's social media had gone silent after people started calling out her contradictions. The GoFundMe page was flooded with demands for refunds. Her carefully constructed image was shattering, but victory felt hollow. Brian and his dad would still leave in 2 days. The apartment they'd been evicted from remained empty. The jobs lost couldn't be recovered. The months of isolation and harassment couldn't be undone. Truth had come too late to save them. Mom was waiting when I got home. Instead of anger, her face showed something else. Uncertainty. She'd been reading the blog too, seeing the evidence she'd dismissed. She didn't apologize, but she also didn't yell. We sat in uncomfortable silence, both processing how wrong we'd been. That evening, I updated the blog one final time. I wrote about the cost of believing lies, about how a community's rush to judgment had destroyed an innocent family. I challenged readers to examine their own biases, to demand evidence before joining joining mob justice. The post went viral, shared thousands of times with comments from people who'd experienced similar injustices. Brian's mom made one last desperate play. She filed an emergency injunction claiming the blog was endangering her safety, that she was receiving death threats, but her credibility was gone. The judge reviewed her history of false allegations and dismissed the motion. For the first time, she faced consequences for her lies. It should have felt like justice, but it didn't. Justice would have been Brian finishing school with friends, his dad keeping a steady job, their family living without fear. Instead, they were packing the last of their belongings, preparing to disappear into anonymity, hoping distance would provide the fresh start our community had denied them. The morning they planned to leave, I woke to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table with printed pages spread across it. The blog posts, the evidence, everything I'd compiled. She gestured for me to sit. Her hands shook slightly as she pushed a paper toward me. Brian's mom's latest social media post claiming she'd been hospitalized due to stress from the harassment campaign. But underneath was a hospital discharge form Nicholas had sent me. Brian's mom had been treated for a minor allergic reaction to shellfish, not stress. Another lie exposed. Mom's expression shifted as she absorbed this final deception. She grabbed her car keys and headed for the door. I followed, confused. We drove to Brian's apartment complex. The moving truck was already there, Brian and his dad loading the last boxes. Mom parked and got out, walking directly to Brian's dad. I watched from the car as she spoke quietly, her gestures apologetic. Brian's dad listened, nodding occasionally. When Mom returned, her eyes were red. The rest happened quickly. Mom made phone calls from the car, to Mrs. Squelch, to other parents, to people I didn't recognize. Within an hour, cars started arriving at the apartment complex. Parents who'd shunned Brian's family for months now carried boxes back up the stairs. The moving truck driver was paid and sent away. I found Brian standing by the dumpsters, watching the scene unfold with bewilderment. He explained that people kept apologizing, offering help, promising things would be different. His dad was inside, overwhelmed by neighbors who'd previously crossed the street to avoid him now offering job referrals and support. The transformation accelerated throughout the day. The grocery store manager who'd banned them called to apologize and offer Brian's dad a position in their warehouse. 3 landlords contacted them about available apartments in better neighborhoods. Parents created a meal rotation schedule to help them through the transition, but Brian's mom wasn't finished. That afternoon, she appeared at the school during dismissal, despite the restraining order. This time, she brought props, a wheelchair she clearly didn't need, bandages wrapped around her arms, a neck brace. She positioned herself where parents would see her, the picture of a battered woman. The performance backfired spectacularly. Parents who'd read the blog recognized the manipulation immediately. When she began wailing about her baby being stolen from her, several mothers stepped forward. They'd compared notes about her lies, her threats, her attempts to destroy an innocent family. One parent called the police while others documented her fake injuries on their phones. The officers who arrived were the same ones who'd responded to her previous calls. They took one look at her theatrical display, checked their notes about her history of false reports, and arrested her for violating the restraining order. As they led her away, she screamed about conspiracies and corruption, but nobody was listening anymore. That evening, the principal called an emergency parent meeting. The auditorium was packed. Parents who'd participated in the harassment stood up one by one, acknowledging their mistakes. The principal announced new policies about verifying allegations before taking action. Mrs. Squelch publicly apologized to Brian and his dad, promising to advocate for them with the school board. Brian's dad was offered his choice of several jobs. Local businesses, embarrassed by their rush to judgment, competed to show their support. He accepted a position at a small accounting firm whose owner had also been falsely accused years earlier and understood the importance of second chances. The apartment they'd been forced to leave suddenly became available again, the landlord waiving the security deposit and offering reduced rent for 6 months as an apology. Neighbors who'd signed petitions to remove them now signed a welcome back card. The same parents who'd whispered about them at school pickup now invited them to community events. Brian returned to school the following week. The desk with predator lover scratched into it had been replaced. Kids who'd tormented him approached cautiously, some apologizing, others simply including him in their activities. His lab partner asked if they could work together again. The lunch monitor who'd kept us apart now smiled when I sat with him, but the damage couldn't be completely undone. Brian flinched when adults approached too quickly. His dad triple-checked locks and saved every receipt, every document, preparing for the next false accusation. They'd learned that community support was conditional, that reputation could be destroyed by lies, and only partially rebuilt by truth. Brian's mom made bail and immediately began a new campaign. She created fake social media accounts to spread rumors about other families who'd supported Brian. She filed complaints with child services about parents who'd helped them move back in. She even tried to get restraining orders against the mothers who'd confronted her at school. This time, nobody believed her. Her tactics were recognized and documented. Parents shared screenshots of her fake accounts with law enforcement. Her complaints were dismissed as retaliatory harassment. When she showed up at the women's shelter claiming to need protection, they turned her away. Her history of coaching false accusations had finally caught up with her. The blog I'd created became a resource for other families facing false accusations. People from across the state shared their stories, their evidence, their pain. Support groups formed. Legal aid organizations took notice. What started as one kid trying to help his friend had grown into something larger. Nicholas's dad quietly worked within the courthouse to flag cases involving Brian's mom. Her previous victims began coming forward, emboldened by the community's newfound awareness. Ex-boyfriends she'd falsely accused of assault. Former employers she'd threatened with harassment claims. Neighbors she'd targeted with protective orders for minor disputes. The pattern was undeniable and finally documented officially. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into her history of false reports. While they couldn't prosecute past cases, they could build a file that would follow her, warning future authorities about her tactics. Brian slowly began to heal. He joined the robotics club, his analytical mind finding peace in circuits and code. Other kids, seeing him for who he really was, rather than through his mother's lies, discovered a loyal friend who'd help with homework and share his lunch with anyone who forgot theirs. His dad, freed from the constant fear of unemployment, began to rebuild their savings Savings. He volunteered with a local organization that helped fathers navigate custody battles, sharing his experience and the evidence-gathering techniques that had ultimately saved them. His quiet dignity and refusal to become bitter inspired others facing similar battles. The custody arrangement was revisited in family court. This time, the judge had access to the full pattern of Brian's mom's behavior. The supervised visitation was revoked. She was ordered to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment before any contact with Brian could be considered. She refused, choosing instead to maintain her victim narrative to a shrinking audience of enablers. Our friendship, forged in crisis, deepened into something permanent. We studied together, joined the same clubs, made plans for college. Other kids who'd been outsiders gravitated toward us, forming a group that valued loyalty over popularity, truth over convenience. The community learned hard lessons about rush judgments and mob mentality. Parent Facebook groups implemented verification requirements for serious allegations. The school board created protocols for investigating claims before taking action. It wasn't perfect. Prejudice and gossip couldn't be legislated away, but it was progress. Brian's mom eventually left town, her reputation finally too damaged to maintain her games. She surfaced months later in another state, running the same playbook with a new victim. But this time, when she began her social media campaign, someone recognized her tactics and linked to our blog. Her new community was warned before the damage could spread. Brian and his dad stayed in our town, no longer as pariahs, but as symbols of resilience. Their story became a cautionary tale told at school board meetings and parent gatherings. Not a story of triumph exactly, but of survival, of truth eventually prevailing despite the cost. The spring before graduation, Brian received a letter from his mom. She'd written from a psychiatric facility where she was finally getting treatment, not by choice, but as part of a plea deal for her latest false accusation case. The letter was full of justifications and blame, but buried within was a single line of truth, an admission that she'd lied about the abuse. Brian showed me the letter by our old meeting spot in the park. He read it once, then folded it carefully and put it away. He didn't need her admission anymore. The truth had already set them free, even if freedom came with scars that would never fully fade. We walked back toward his apartment where his dad was cooking dinner for a gathering of families who'd become their chosen community. Parents who'd once feared them now trusted them with their children. Kids who'd tormented Brian now sought his tutoring help. The apartment that had been vandalized was now filled with warmth and acceptance. As we reached the building, Brian paused and looked back at the path we'd traveled, literally and figuratively, from isolation to integration, from lies to truth, from despair to hope. It hadn't been the childhood he deserved, but it had taught him lessons about integrity and perseverance that would serve him well. His dad greeted us at the door, no longer the haunted man who'd packed boxes in defeat, but someone who'd weathered the storm and emerged stronger. The apartment buzzed with conversation and laughter, the sound of a community that had learned from its mistakes and chosen to do better. That night, surrounded by people who'd gone from persecutors to protectors, I understood that justice isn't always dramatic or complete. Sometimes it's as simple as truth being recognized, lies being exposed, and a community choosing to change. Brian and his dad had lost months of peace, financial security, and faith in their neighbors. But they'd gained something too, proof that truth, however delayed, still had power. The blog remained active, helping other families navigate similar situations. The evidence we'd gathered became a template for documenting abuse and false accusations. Brian's story, once a source of pain, became a beacon for others trapped in webs of lies. As graduation approached, Brian received acceptance letters from several colleges. His essay about overcoming adversity through truth and persistence had resonated with admissions committees. He chose a school close enough to stay connected to his dad, but far enough to build his own identity beyond his mother's shadow. The night before he left for college, we sat in his room surrounded by boxes once again, but these boxes represented hope, not defeat. His dad had helped him pack, both of them moving forward rather than running away. The community that had failed them now celebrated Brian's success as their own. Brian pulled out the flash drive I'd given him years earlier, still containing all the evidence of his mother's lies. He'd kept it as a reminder, he said, not of the pain, but of the power of truth. He handed it back to me, saying someone else might need it more. The cycle of helping others would continue. His dad drove us to campus on move-in day. The man who'd once been shunned at school pickup now walked proudly beside his son, helping carry boxes to the dorm. Other parents smiled and waved, seeing just another father supporting his child's dreams. The transformation was complete.